A woman who just lounges around the house without earning any money has no urgent matters to deal with. Why are you staying at home without doing housework? My husband berated me when work piled up and I couldn't manage the household chores. In my anger, I left the house and an unexpected turn of events occurred because of something I discovered. My name is Michelle Anderson. I'm 49 years old and work as a designer. I design brochures for various lectures and events, and creating posters has been my recent job. I started this designer job 25 years ago, when I had my son and wanted to work from home. Before that, I worked in an office at a company, so I started my design career with zero experience. At first, I didn't understand the specifications and struggled with the design software. I even thought maybe this job wasn't for me. However, a senior colleague at my current company understood my situation and patiently taught me the basics. Back then, remote work wasn't common, but for me, with a newborn, they would share their computer screen online and guide me through various things. Thanks to that, I'm now in a position where I teach my juniors. While handling my own job, I also teach those who, like me, are starting from scratch aiming to become designers. During the day, I primarily work as a designer, and in my spare time, I somehow manage to get the household chores done. I live with my husband, John, and my son, Michael. John, 2 years older than me, is an IT professional. We met through a friend's introduction and bonded over attending concerts of a certain band, eventually leading to our marriage. Michael is now 25, and since graduating from college, he's been working at an insurance company nearby. Both of them seem great to outsiders, and neighbors are often like, "What a lovely husband and son you have." But in reality, both John and Michael are far from wonderful in my eyes. Before Michael was born, John was indeed a great boyfriend and husband. But after Michael's birth, when I quit my job, John changed drastically. Once I stopped working outside, John started boasting about his job, saying he's superior since he's the breadwinner, and began spending money recklessly. Even when I began working as a designer, he'd belittle my job, saying any home-based job was easy and anyone could do it, that he was the one doing all the complicated tasks, and he wouldn't listen when I tried to defend myself. "You, who can't earn much, should be grateful to me and listen to me." I've thought of leaving him multiple times because of such statements. The reason I didn't divorce was because I thought it'd be better for Michael to have a father. I grew up in a single-parent household without an adult at home. Remembering the loneliness from those times, I didn't want Michael to feel the same. Contrary to my hopes, perhaps due to John's influence, Michael grew up with the skewed notion that men who work are noble and women are incompetent. Though he's well-mannered in public, he often hurls harsh words at me, calling me useless. Despite both claiming they're earning, neither contribute more than $100 to the household each month. John spends his money on drinks, and Michael splurges on clothes and accessories, leaving all household responsibilities to me. I was doing my best to manage the household finances while thinking every day about how to make ends meet. Furthermore, they both use their jobs as an excuse to avoid any housework. I once left chores undone, hoping they'd pitch in, but they ignored dishes piled in the sink and laundry baskets overflowing, forcing me to step in. I taught Michael basic chores when he was little, but now I wonder if he even remembers. This is why I'm left with all the housework. Even though I work too, I considered getting some handy household appliances to ease the chores, but John and Michael vehemently opposed. It was frustrating when they argue that, since I only work from home, it would mean I've hit rock bottom if I also cut corners with housework. No matter how often I explain that being a designer isn't easy, they just don't listen. They seem to think that just because I work from home, it's a laid-back job that requires no special skills. Originally, the reason I started working from home was because John never helped with child raise when Michael was young. Back then, John was hardly ever home, always using work as an excuse, and wouldn't even take a day off when I was sick. Even after work, he'd always go out for drinks with coworkers, claiming it was still part of the job. When I was struggling with child rearing and found out John had somehow arranged a celebratory drink for himself, I was livid. Yet, thinking of Michael, I've continued our married life and started my home-based job. Seeing how Michael turned out makes me want to sigh. I tried hard to instill proper values in him, but in the end, he seemed to be influenced more by the closest male figure, John. Just yesterday, Michael returned home past midnight after hanging out, apparently having had junk food. He even left the trash on the dining table. While I shook my head at his behavior, I started my busy day with tasks like taking out the trash and making breakfast. Then, one day, just before 5 p.m., usual time I get off work, I was suddenly assigned a new project. Initially, someone else was handling it, but the person fell ill, and a request came in for a revision to be submitted by the next morning. Everyone else was occupied, and I was the only one available, so the task fell on me. I usually enjoy flexible hours without overtime, but I decided to buckle down and get to work on this. Luckily, the original person in charge had sent me notes and documents from meetings, and the revision instructions weren't too complicated. Still, revising a design made for a client I'd never met or talked to was quite challenging. I reviewed the styles and themes of past client event posters and websites, making sure to try different approaches without straying too far from their preferences. By the time I felt I was finally done, it was already 9 p.m., and it took me by surprise. Before I realized it, what was once dusk outside had turned pitch black, and I had been so engrossed in my work that I even forgot to eat. At that moment, I heard the front door open. Around this time, it's usually John who comes home. Michael's been out late partying these days, so with that in mind, I pondered what to do next while sending out my data. When I walked into the living room, John was already seated at the dining table, engrossed in his smartphone. "What about dinner?" Without even looking up when he heard me enter, that was all he said. But, since I usually start preparing dinner after I finish work, I hadn't even begun cooking yet. Feeling a bit annoyed by John's attitude, I explained the situation. "I'm sorry. It's been a long day for me, and I haven't been able to prepare anything. I haven't eaten either, so how about we order food delivery?" I said this while making myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, expecting an agreement from John. Instead, a loud thud reached my ears. I looked over to see John, glaring at me with anger, having slammed his fist on the table. "You haven't prepared dinner? What were you thinking?" Stunned by his sudden outburst, I found myself trying to justify my actions. I guess anyone would feel the need to defend themselves when confronted so aggressively. "Well, but you sometimes come home late from work too, right? Today was an urgent task, and there was just no helping it. No matter how regular a job might be with its 9-to-5 schedule, sometimes overtime is unavoidable." I thought that by comparing my situation to that, even John would understand. However, far from calming down, John's anger only seemed to intensify. He raised an eyebrow and began shouting at me. "A woman who lounges around at home without earning any money has no emergencies or responsibilities. What's the point of being home if you don't even do housework?" I always knew John felt this way, but it still angered me to have it thrown in my face so bluntly. He always belittles my job, and I wonder if he thinks of me as just some kind of maid or something. Driven by that thought, instead of my usual attitude, I directly countered him. "You know, I do work and I do get paid. If anyone's loafing around at home, it's you and Michael, isn't it?" For the first time in a while, expressing what I truly felt was a weight off my chest. On the other hand, probably because my words were true, John's face turned beet red in rage and he shouted even louder. "What the heck? You've got some nerve talking back when you're living off my money. That's it, get out right now." The smirk on John's face told me he was hoping I'd plead with him to stay. Certainly, he was probably expecting me to apologize to ensure I was not kicked out of this house, and to start preparing dinner right now. It was like tactics used by grade schoolers who bully their classmates. My husband says such things to the wife he lives with, and my son shares the same values. After hearing John's comments, I suddenly felt sick of living with such people. "Yeah, I got it. I'll leave now." I said that to John, who was smirking, and quickly packed my essential work laptop, some documents, and a few clothes into a bag. In addition to my usual handbag, I put on a big backpack filled with my belongings and headed for the front door. Noticing me, John, seemingly taken aback, hurriedly ran out from the living room. I guess he didn't think I would actually leave, and do so immediately. "Hey, where are you going?" Is panicking the right word? John asked with a voice that was a mix of confusion and urgency. Irritated by that, I sighed and looked back at John. "Didn't you tell me to leave? I'm not so foolish to want to stay after hearing that." At my words, John looked regretful but wasn't straightforward enough to ask me to stay, so he just mumbled and remained silent. I turned to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped outside. The words John threw at me were so childish, I almost laughed. Just remember, whatever happens, it's not my fault. Ignoring him, I closed the door and headed towards the station. There were a few hotels near our local station. There weren't any events nearby today, so there should be at least one room available tonight. I assumed as much and decided to call a hotel I found online. That day, I managed to check into the first hotel I called. I hadn't stayed in a hotel in ages, and it was nice to see that there was a cafe on the first floor so I didn't have to worry about meals. The convenience of having a laundromat nearby made me feel quite excited. Having missed dinner, I bought a sandwich and salad from a supermarket and ate it in my room. Usually, I'm always preparing meals at home to save money, so the taste of ready-made food felt incredibly delicious. There is merit to homemade food, but you still get tired of a bit making things by yourself every time. My breakfast the next day was simple, toast and scrambled eggs, but not having to prepare it myself made it feel all the more special. After eating, I went back to my hotel room to work. Most hotels these days have internet access via Wi-Fi, so there were no issues there. The revisions I sent out yesterday got the green light from the client, so that was a relief. While working, I pondered what to have for lunch. When I thought about heading out for my lunch break, I noticed a message from John. The message was sent about 30 minutes ago, which was odd since John usually would be at work at this time. It seemed that John had taken time off just to harass me. You won't have a home to return to anymore. With those words, he had attached a picture of my belongings scattered around the local dumpster. Around the same time, I also noticed a message from Michael. Looks like Dad's been clearing out your stuff since this morning. Serves you right. After checking those messages and pictures, I immediately requested time off for the afternoon and rushed out of the hotel. Many of the items scattered in the photos were work-related books which would cost a lot to replace. Moreover, even though the trash had already been picked up, I thought it'd be a nuisance to the neighbors to have my belongings scattered about. So, I rented a car and headed to the dump. When I got there, just as the pictures had shown, my work stuff, hobby books, and even clothes were scattered without being bagged. I couldn't fathom how someone could lack common sense to this degree. Frustrated, I gathered everything and stuffed it into the rental car. Among the scattered items, I noticed something out of place. Huh? Is this? While puzzled, I prioritized collecting my belongings and continued with the task. After collecting all my belongings, I decided to drive straight to my parents' home. My childhood home is about an hour's drive away. My mother greeted me with a surprised but warm smile. I didn't want to worry her too much, so I hid the details and just asked to store my things, and moved the dumped items into a room at my parents' place. She seemed to sense that something was amiss. Feeling guilty, I left my parents' place. After returning to the hotel from my parents' home, I did some work and then had dinner. There was something truly appreciable about having a meal made by someone else. Moreover, being freed from the day's domestic tasks, my work felt a lot easier. Normally, while working, part of my mind would always be occupied by household chores. Now, without those distractions, I could focus solely on work. Feeling content, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, my smartphone rang out of the blue. As my smartphone suddenly started ringing, I thought it might be work-related, so I answered the call without even checking the caller on the screen. Hey! You took my treasure, didn't ya? Don't mess with me! The next instant, Michael's yelling blasted through the phone. It seemed he didn't care about how loud he was being either because he was so angry or just to annoy me. As the ringing in my ears continued, I tried to comprehend what Michael was yelling about. Then, it hit me. I remembered something. To begin with, Michael's prized possessions were a collection of expensive sunglasses and high-end brand accessories that he cherishes deeply. Each piece has cost several $1,000s, and Michael had about 10 of them. Why would I take them? Didn't I just give you the jewelry box without saying anything a while ago? I used to keep all my jewelry in a jewelry box on the bathroom counter. But one day, Michael took out all my things and started putting his accessories in. I thought it was mine, but I figured it's better than getting complained at for damaging or losing his pricey items. So, I just gave the jewelry box to Michael. If I had any intentions of doing something to Michael's treasures, I would have taken precautions back then. However, Michael seemed to be convinced that I did it and wouldn't listen to reason. No, it was definitely you. Is this some sort of payback for what Dad did? I sighed in exasperation at Michael's outrage and how he conveniently forgot his own actions. I decided to share what I saw at the trash dump earlier. By the way, I might have seen my jewelry box at the dump. But I thought it was empty since it didn't have my stuff, so I left it. Upon hearing this, Michael's breath hitched. He probably realized his accessories and sunglasses might still be inside. The jewelry box was something I bought during my single days. John probably remembered it as my stuff and just discarded it at the dump without a second thought. After all, John wouldn't know that the things inside had changed to Michael's belongings. You gotta be kidding me! What are you gonna do about my accessories? It was almost midnight, and John should have been asleep by that time. Still, over the phone, I could hear Michael shouting angrily, presumably at John. I felt he didn't care about me anymore, and, annoyed by his immaturity, I hung up. Later, I decided to check out the mentioned trash dump. To my surprise, I found John and Michael arguing there. It's your fault for being so careless. Getting upset over some jewelry and sunglasses is just ridiculous. Self-centered John voiced his opinion, to which Michael retorted while stamping his foot in frustration. What? It's obviously Dad's fault. All of these cost more than $10,000, you know. Hearing the amount, John started yelling about wasteful spending, creating a vicious cycle of blame. In Michael's hand was a pair of sunglasses with broken lenses, rendering them worthless. The other accessories, which Michael had always kept in pristine condition, were probably damaged too. But John had carelessly dumped my luggage around here, so I bet there are scratches on the accessories as well. Oh my gosh, my necklace! If it's this damaged, it's worthless now. Michael lets out a scream-like shout, only to be mocked by John as being too effeminate. Arguing loudly in the middle of the night, I thought it would surely bother the neighbors, so I decided to intervene. Hey, it's already midnight, you know? Can't you consider the people around here? Hearing my voice, the two quickly turned towards me. And then, taking a deep breath, John started yelling at me. All of this is your fault, Michelle. Why are you standing there so irresponsibly? Could he genuinely believe that it was more my fault for not doing the housework than his strange actions? I got fed up with that, reached into my bag and began to speak as I pulled something out. You're the one at fault for tossing someone's stuff without even checking. Enough's enough, it's over. What I was holding was a document from a lawyer who assists divorce process. After return to the hotel from my parents' house, I had decided to get a divorce right away and had contacted a lawyer at the hotel. Thankfully, I already had my belongings with me. I felt a sense of relief thinking that I just needed to consult a lawyer. Seeing the document, John glared at me, saying something incomprehensible, as if accusing me of trying to escape. But to me, divorce isn't about escaping or anything of the sort. Wanting John to understand this, I decided to reveal a truth I had kept hidden. Enough already, who do you think you are? I have evidence of all the verbal abuse from both you and Michael. The truth was, ever since Michael graduated college, I've been documenting the verbal abuse from both him and John. I had hesitated to divorce, but I believed this would be advantageous if the need arose. You don't have the right to refuse a divorce, John. If you don't want this to go to court, just agree it now. I was certain that saying this would make John give in. John has always been prideful, and the thought of losing in court would surely break him. It seemed he's realized that, while he had no evidence, I had 3 years' worth of it. Got it. I just have to agree this, right? Despite John's reluctant decision, Michael was the one who wouldn't let it go. With a voice full of defiance, Michael ranted on, as if refusing to accept the decision to divorce. What? Then who's gonna do the chores? I sure as hell ain't gonna do it. Exasperated by Michael's immature outburst, which resembled a teenage rebellion, it seemed John reached his breaking point. Enough. Shut up. Stop being so selfish. Those words, coming from me, were something I'd have liked to throw right back at John. However, within John, there seemed to be a sense of urgency. With this, if I have let my mood sour and threatened to take this to court, it seemed like John would be in trouble. He was trying to silence Michael for the sake of his own pride. Michael, angered by John's actions, headed back home making a fuss. Ignoring Michael, John and I decided to enter a nearby diner to check the document and exchange the lawyer's contact. Even though it was late at night, the diner still had a fair number of young people. I ordered just coffee and waited as John checked the document. He probably wanted to get this over with quickly. By the time I finished my coffee, he'd done, and I stood up with them. Well then, I'll have the lawyer get in touch with you regarding consultation fees. I thought it was only natural to say that, but it seemed John hadn't even considered the fees. Maybe he thought he wouldn't have to pay it unless it went to court. Hey, hold on, are you planning to take money from me? As John stood up and shouted loudly, the states of those around us pierced through. I was also standing up, holding the papers, so to an onlooker, it must have been an interesting, gossipy situation. I had nothing to hide, so I could have spoken up, but John fell silent, seemingly aware of the states. Suppressing the urge to laugh at John's reaction, I decided to convey just one last thing. Considering the trouble you've caused me, paying the lawyer's fees is only natural. You're an adult, so it's about time you learn to take care of yourself properly. Satisfied that I've spoken my mind, I walked back to the hotel. With this unpleasant problem finally moving towards a solution, I was able to sleep soundly that night. After completing the necessary procedures, I am now officially divorced from John. Thanks to the records of his verbal abuse, I was able to smoothly get divorced with him. I started living on my own and now enjoy a comfortable life. John and Michael are still living together in the same house. However, with me no longer there to support and manage the household, and considering John still pays the lawyer fees in installments, their financial situation seems quite tough. Considering both of them used to spend money recklessly, it's unlikely that this will suddenly change. John seems to be working desperately, but with more of his income going into the household, he's complaining that he can't spend money on alcohol and hobbies. As for Michael, his argument with John at the garbage dump was witnessed by clients of the insurance company, and he lost the trust of the neighbors. Insurance is something you can only rely on people you trust. Even though they used to think he was a nice person, word kept spreading, and apparently, he was encouraged to resign from his job. Michael, infuriated by that, resigned from his job. However, he had no savings and couldn't cover his living expenses. As a result, he's currently working part-time jobs while being caught up in the job hunting process. From the home I left behind, it appears there's no room for maintaining appearances, as the arguing voices of John and Michael echo every day. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying a smooth and delightful life in my solo living arrangement. With the freedom of time that I couldn't easily find while caught up in household chores, I'm even considering exploring new hobbies. Having more time on my hands also allows me to approach work with a sense of ease. I'm now actively engaged in my job with the intention of giving back to the company that supported me. Living these fulfilling days, I truly believe that divorce was the right decision. From now on, I intend to live my life for myself and face my computer with that in mind.